Today's video will have some spoilers for the most recent episode of The Mandalorian, Chapter 14. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your warning. So, Boba Fett is back. That's not surprising considering his appearance back in Chapter 9. What did surprise me is that they very quickly addressed the entire question of whether or not he and Jango Fett are Mandalorians. And they are. Jango Fett was a foundling, which lines up with a bunch of stuff from Star Wars Legends. But this has been up for debate since the second season of the Clone Wars series. So today I wanted to talk about Boba Fett, Jango Fett, and their complicated behind-the-scenes and in-universe history with the Mandalorian Creed. Of course, Boba Fett was created for The Empire Strikes Back to be the bounty hunter character that tracks down the Millennium Falcon. The idea that he was a Mandalorian came from The Empire Strikes Back sketchbook, which was kind of like the Art of books we get for Star Wars movies now. And by the way, The Art of the Mandalorian just came out, and so far it's really great, I'm just saying. Anyway, Boba Fett's armor was originally intended to be worn by a squad of super commandos, troops from the Mandalore system armed with weapons built into their suits. That was the first time Star Wars fans ever heard that word, so obviously it connected Boba Fett with the Mandalorian people. Over the following 22 years, Boba Fett's history and the Mandalorian culture was fleshed out in the expanded universe, now known as Star Wars Legends. But Boba Fett was a significant part of the universe, and I would credit those stories as the reason so many people love the character. In more recent years, people have claimed that he's overrated, he goes out like a punk in Return of the Jedi, and while I won't deny that, those Legends tales tell a far different story. The Tales of the Bounty Hunter book includes a story all about Fett, and it gave us our first backstory for him. Last One Standing by Daniel Keyes Morin proposed that his true identity was Jaster Muriel. He was a journeyman protector, basically a marshal who saw himself as a keeper of the peace in the Outer Rim. Kinda similar to Cobb Vanth, actually. But that story came out in 1996 and was what I believed to be true until 2002, when everything changed. That's the first time I truly understood that the movies could and would change what had been written. That George Lucas let people play in his sandbox, but that the universe was ultimately his to do with as he pleased. I wasn't mad about it, but I have this very specific memory of being at school with my friend at the age of 15, wondering what to do with our Tales of the Bounty Hunters knowledge now. Attack of the Clones turned Boba Fett into the clone of Jango Fett, a new Mandalorian wearing different but similar armor. He was the template for the clone army, and Boba was part of his payment. He wanted a son. Unfortunately, that son watched him lose his head on Geonosis. The expanded universe did its best to reconcile Attack of the Clones with existing stories by saying that Jaster Muriel was a completely different character. Everything established about Fett from Tales of the Bounty Hunters was moved to Muriel, where he was still a journeyman protector and he fought against Death Watch in the Mandalorian Civil War. During that time, he saved the life of an orphaned child named Jango Fett. He raised Jango as a son until he was ambushed and killed by Death Watch. So, okay, cool. Yeah, the story changed around, but Jango and by proxy Boba Fett were both still Mandalorians. But then the story changed again in 2010 when the second season of the Clone Wars aired. We traveled to the planet Mandalore itself, where we were told by Prime Minister Almec that Jango Fett was not Mandalorian after all. Almec says Jango Fett was a common bounty hunter and he had no idea how he got that armor, and a million fanboys, myself included, cried out in confusion. There's a really great featurette for the second season of the Clone Wars called Creating Mandalore. It's on YouTube if you want to find it, but Dave Filoni says that idea came directly from George. He wanted to differentiate the Mandalorian people of the show into more of a standardized military. The look of the Mandalorian people was very Nordic. Dave goes on to talk about how Boba Fett's armor especially is different from the Mandalorian armor we see in the Clone Wars. He's added stuff, he's tricked it out a little more, he's got trophies. Filoni describes Fett's Empire-era armor as mix and match, as if he's found various components over the years to build what he's got, and he did that because it's what his father did. He wanted to be like Dad. So 10 years ago, I do think the intention was for the Fetts to be completely set apart from the Mandalorians. I think that was George Lucas's desire. As a fan, I still pushed back against that in my own headcanon. I proposed the idea that Almec was simply looking down his nose at someone he thought of as lesser. After all, Jango Fett's homeworld in canon was still listed as Concord Dawn, a planet that is in Mandalorian space. I moved forward with the assumption that that probably wasn't true in George's mind, but I liked it so I kept it in my head. And that's how it's been for 10 or so years. Leading up to The Mandalorian, especially with all the teases about Boba Fett returning, people kept asking me if the Fetts were Mandalorian, and I was saying probably not, because Dave and George said so. And I feel like I just very recently fully accepted that Jango and Boba Fett were not Mandalorian, and that was okay. And then Chapter 14 comes out, and Boba Fett blurts out their entire family history, and we learn that Jango's upbringing might as well be what it was in Legends. He was taken in as a foundling and raised as a Mandalorian, and he fought in the Mandalorian Civil Wars. So if Jango Fett is a Mandalorian again, Boba Fett is too. I'm getting so much emotional whiplash from being told that the Fetts are Mandalorians, and then they aren't, and now they are again. So how do we reconcile what we know about the Fetts now versus what was actually said in the Clone Wars? I actually think it fits perfectly fine. My initial thoughts about Almec and what he said work, and they work well. The Mandalorian people were based off of a Nordic look. Tamura Morrison is Maori, so I 100% think there is probably some bias from Almec, who, surprise surprise, turns out to be a bad guy. I think he views Mandalorians born on Mandalore as true Mandalorians, and Mandalorians born elsewhere in Mandalorian space as lesser. I bet he views foundlings as even lower, even if they were born on Concord Dawn. What I love about this reasoning is that it all fits in so well with one of the ongoing themes of the show. What does it mean to be a Mandalorian? Din's big thing is his armor. To him, that's his identity. But just putting on a cool-looking helmet and a jetpack doesn't make you a good person. It's what you do with what you have that makes you who you are. Almec is probably someone who thinks he is a model Mandalorian just because of his heritage and nothing more. And by the way, we've already seen a transition away from the very standardized, everyone looks the same style Mandalorians in Star Wars Rebels. We meet Sabine Wren and her whole family. Bo-Katan gives a speech to a group of Mandalorians that are very diverse shortly after fighting against and defeating the Saxons, who are much more closely aligned with what we saw in the Clone Wars. It's interesting that the Mandalorians seem to have a history of fighting amongst themselves just as much as they fight and conquer other worlds. There are various sects and clans and houses, and what little we saw of them in Star Wars Rebels gave off some serious Game of Thrones vibes, like they're all vying for power over one another. It led to them losing their homeworld to the Empire, and it sounds like they haven't truly retaken it even by the time of The Mandalorian. Bo-Katan says that they are stronger together, and they're probably going to have to unite and find some common ground if they want to go home. They've got to put aside their differences in ideologies and backgrounds to instead find what they have in common. Now, I don't think George had all this in mind when he temporarily took away Jango Fett's Mandalorian status. I think he just had a story to tell about the Mandalorian people specifically, and it was different from what we had seen before, so that was the simplest solution, just say they aren't Mandalorian. But I think it's really working out now. I'd be curious to know what he thinks of these episodes in The Mandalorian and the developments with the Fetts, but I personally don't think he would view it as any kind of contradiction or betrayal of what he wanted. I think Filoni is taking the next step in the evolution of the Mandalorian people to tell a story that is culturally relevant today. But I went off on a huge tangent there. I really just wanted to talk about the history of the Fetts throughout the years and how it's changed, and then to make sense of at least the parts that are still canon. And I've done that, so that's it for today. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all of our Mandalorian coverage, follow us on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out our Patreon page where we're releasing audio commentaries for all these new episodes. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.